Major Pierce Butler was a man of tremendous wealth. Major Butler had been a Revolutionary War veteran, a successful planter, and a signer of the United States Constitution, although he would only lend his signature after he authored the Fugitive Slave Clause. He was adamant about protecting slavery and ensuring its survival in the new republic. When Major Butler died, he left his two grandsons, Pierce and John, with a handsome inheritance, two lavish island plantations, one cotton, one rice. Hugging the Georgia coast, these island plantations were home to some 919 enslaved people who, for generations, had toiled in the Georgian heat from can't see in the morning till can't see at night. For many of them, this was the only home they'd ever know. Their work had made the Butler family one of the most affluent families in the nation. However, Major Pierce Butler's eldest grandson and namesake, Pierce Butler, wasn't the disciplined planter his grandfather had been. Butler's interest lay less with the ownership and operation of his plantation and more with a growing gambling habit. Gambling debts and bad investments began to drown Pierce Butler under a deluge of debt. While in Philadelphia, Butler met an English Shakespearean actor and ardent abolitionist named Fanny Kimball. When they met, Fanny was unaware of the driving force behind the Butler family fortune. After a 2-year courtship, they married. Fanny Kimball Butler visited the Butler plantation in 1838. She captured in her journal the daily horrors of plantation life. Fanny's visit made two things painfully clear. One, the foundation of Butler's wealth lay squarely on the backs of enslaved women, children, and men. And two, a marriage between a slaver and abolitionist could not last. Pierce and Fanny divorced in 1849. The court ordered quarterly payments to his ex-wife. That only added salt to his deepening financial wounds. Soon, Butler's growing debt forced his hand. His most valued assets were people, children, women, and men, the families that staffed and operated his plantation. To recover lost finances, Butler would hold an auction. Not an unusual tactic, many slaveholders turned to their enslaved property to heal financial ills. Thomas Jefferson and others moved their enslaved property to find financial relief. Even the prestigious Georgetown University sold over 200 enslaved people just to keep their academic doors open. This was just one of the ugly realities of slavery. But the Butler auction would be a colossus. Nearly 500 women, children, and men were set to be sold to the highest bidders. The auction would take place on the second and third day of March, 1859. In the weeks prior, prospective buyers poured into Savannah, Georgia. Notorious slave dealer Joseph Bryan was running the show. An auction this major required the largest slave trader in the state of Georgia, and Bryan was just that. It soon became evident that Bryan's holding pen on Savannah's Johnson Square, the largest square in town, wouldn't hold the anticipated crowds. Bryan moved the auction to the spacious Tin Brook racecourse on Savannah's outskirts. For a month, advertisements announcing the coming auction peppered newspapers throughout the entire South. Mingling within the throngs of buyers was Mortimer Thompson. Thompson, a writer who used the pen name Q.K. Philander Dough Sticks, was a northern reporter who worked for the New York Tribune. Working undercover, playing the part of an enslaver, Thompson slipped into Savannah, determined to expose the atrocity of slavery and feed a growing abolitionist movement with damning ammunition. Thompson wrote, "For several days before the sale, every hotel in Savannah was crowded with speculators from North and South Carolina Virginia, Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana. Nothing was heard for days in the bar rooms and public rooms but talk of the great sale. The nearly 500 men, women, and children were transported from the Butler Island plantation to Savannah by steamer and rail. Once at the racetrack grounds, they were housed in horse stalls. In the days before the big sale, buyers visited the makeshift slave pens to inspect the human merchandise. Inspections involved opening mouths, poking, pulling, and prodding. Potential buyers forced enslaved people to jump up and down and bend over, stripping them of clothing and dignity, all in an attempt to assess their health and future productivity. All to a backdrop of crude and vulgar commentaries. With an inventory this massive, getting an early look-see at the nearly 500 lives for sale was vital preparation for the bidding wars to come. When the big day arrived, the racetrack was a mix of electric excitement and gut-wrenching sorrow. As the auction opened, the skies let loose. A driving rain fell, further dampening the spirits of the enslaved while masking tears. A child slipped away from a mother's grasp. A man wailed for his wife. A wife shot a panicked glance to her husband, all keenly aware that they'd probably never see each other again. Thompson wrote,
"On the faces of all was an expression of heavy grief. Some appeared to be resigned to the hard stroke of fortune that had torn them from their homes and were sadly trying to make the best of it. Some sat brooding moodily over their sorrows, their chins resting on their hands, their eyes staring vacantly, and their bodies rocking to and fro with a restless motion that was never stilled. Few wept. The place was too public and the drivers too near, though some occasionally turned aside to give way to a few quiet tears."
The anxious crowd threw their voices up to the racetrack grandstand. The bidding had begun. Even in the rain and howling winds, the event took on a carnival-like atmosphere. Poker-faced bidders tried to outduel each other, each keeping their plan close to the vest. Enslaved Africans stood stoically atop the grandstand platform, peering at the ravenous crowd. They too had plans. Their plans centered around one common theme: keeping family together. The reporter Thompson threw out a couple of cautious bids of his own, maintaining his cover. Later he wrote that from his place in the crowd, he spied a 23-year-old enslaved man named Jeffrey. After being purchased for $1,310, Jeffrey immediately got into the ear of his new master, telling him of yet another excellent purchase he'd be foolish to pass on: a young lady named Dorcas. He boasted that she can do a whole heap of work in a day, and she's one of the best rice hands in the whole plantation, worth $1,200 easy, a first-rate bargain at that. The sales pitch was so convincing that the buyer was nearly sold on the idea. That is, until the prospective buyer found out that to buy Dorcas, he would have to purchase 4 of her family members as well. Jeffrey's plan had been undone by a provision Pierce Butler had made that stated families would be sold in groups, a provision that would be violated again and again during the 2 days of the sale, as families were routinely ripped apart. Jeffrey's heart sank as he watched the love of his life, his fiancée Dorcas, sold to another bidder. The rains continued non-stop for the entire auction. It is said that the heavens were weeping for those lives that had been ripped apart in those 2 days. They say that even God wept for the further shattering of already broken lives. In all, 436 children, women, and men were sold, among them 30 babies. The auction brought Butler a sum of $303,400. $850, $7 million in today's money. The sale is known as the Weeping Time. It was the largest auction of enslaved people ever held on American soil. When the final bid was accepted and the last of the enslaved was sold, the rain stopped. Near the end of the sale, Butler appeared, handing out freshly minted $1 coins to a few of his now former property. A token of gratitude, of remorse, of guilt, of something. About a week following the Weeping Time auction of March 2nd and 3rd, 1859, Mortimer Thompson published his story in the New York Tribune. Written on his train ride back to New York, Thompson's blistering account sent shockwaves through the North, tremors through the South, and garnered international attention. The abolitionist cause had yet more wattage with which to amplify the call to end slavery. From the South came calls, too, for Mortimer Thompson's head. Within the nation, the Weeping Time further widened the rift between North and South. The international attention this story received forced the United States to come to terms with the reality that the vile and evil institution of slavery benefited both North and South. America had proclaimed to the world that it stood for liberty, freedom, and equality. This grim irony had been exposed. Only a year before the Georgia auction, Lincoln declared that the nation could not endure permanently half slave, half free. Thompson's news story added to the growing list of factors that pushed the nation to civil war. In 1863, at the height of the American Civil War, Pierce Butler's ex-wife, Fanny Kimball, published the journal she'd written during her time at the Butler plantation. It painted a scathing portrait of slavery in the United States South. The journal was published in New York and London. Some believe Kimball's journal, with its biting rebuke of slavery, created more uneasiness around London and may have influenced Britain's decision to pull back economic and military support to the Confederate States, perhaps hastening the death of the Confederacy and an end to the enslavement of 4 million people. The Gullah people of Georgia, including the descendants of those enslaved souls scattered throughout the South, still refer to those rain-soaked days as the Weeping Time, a time, they say, that even God wept. In 1867, 2 years following the Civil War, Pierce Butler found himself broke again.